Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. When the Lumix S9 was released, one thing that was obviously missing was a matching kit lens for the S9. The Lumix S 2060 and the 28-200 are very nice, but they don't exactly match the compact size of the Lumix S9. The new Lumix 26mm lens is compact, but it is a manual focus lens with a fixed f8 aperture, so it doesn't really match the S9 target users. But the missing link has finally arrived. This is the Lumix S 18-40 f4.5 to 6.3, a really compact zoom lens for the L-mount full-frame cameras that will also be one of the new kit lens for the S9. In this review, we'll have a look at the design and image quality of this lens. I will also compare it with one of my favorite kit lens, which is the Lumix S 2060. Now, right after I record the first half of this review, I will jump on a plane and bring the Lumix S9 and this lens and travel to Taiwan and Japan. So the future me will share with you my thoughts and experience about using this compact zoom lens for travel. The other lens that I will also bring with me is my Sigma 45mm f2.8, so I will also let you know which lens I end up using more during my trip and which lens I like more. Before we start, a quick disclaimer. This review is based on a pre-production sample supplied by Panasonic. I will need to return the lens sample after I finish this review. I just want to make sure everything is clear before we start. This Lumix 1840 is a really compact lens. The Lumix S 20-60 is not a large lens, but if you put them together side by side, you will notice the 1840 is significantly smaller. Part of the reason why this lens is so small is because it has the collapsible design. When you shoot with this lens, you have to turn the zoom ring from the white dot to 18mm before you can start shoot with it. The lens would extend quite a bit and pretty much double the size when you are shooting. When you turn the zoom ring from 18 to 40, the lens will first become a little bit shorter up until around 30mm focal length, then it will extend a bit when it approaches 40mm focal length. Because of the body's very compact size, the zoom ring and the focus ring are very close to each other. So if you have large hands and fingers, you may accidentally turn both rings at the same time when you zoom in or out. In practice, this is usually not really a problem, as you would quite likely shoot with autofocus. So if you turn the focus ring accidentally, it doesn't do anything. But if you use manual focus, then you have to be careful. There's a bit of extra resistance at 18mm, so you won't accidentally collapse the lens when you are shooting. But if you accidentally collapse the lens, then you won't be able to take any photo unless you extend it again, or if you are shooting video, then the video recording will stop immediately. Because this is the first collapsible lens for the L-mount, so some extra communication is required for the camera to understand if the lens is in the collapsed form or not, and it can then display the correct message to remind the user. With the Lumix S9, even though with the firmware 1.0, it can already handle that correctly, but if you are shooting with other cameras like the S5 or the S5 II, there will be a firmware update for that. It doesn't mean you can't use the lens without these firmware updates. The lens still seems to work fine, it's just the camera wouldn't give you the correct message on the screen when the lens is collapsed. The weight of this lens is just around 150 grams, so it's very lightweight. A lot lighter than even the Lumix 2060, which is around 350 grams. No lens hood is included, and the lens has a 62mm front filter thread. So the filter size is different from the 2060, 28-200 and the other 1.8 prime lenses, which are all 67mm. It means if you want to share filter with one of those lenses, you will need a step-up range from 62mm to 67mm. While it is quite a small lens and it's just a kit lens, but it is still a weather-resistant lens, just like the Lumix S 2060. I've mentioned many times on this channel before, designing a lens is always about compromises. So with such a compact size, there are two main downsides with this lens. The first one is the zoom range. It is more limited compared to the normal size kit lens. The Lumix S 2060 is a 3x zoom, while this 1840 is only 2.22 times. So just slightly more than 2 times. Combining this with the slightly wider wide end, it means the tele end of the 1840 is a lot shorter than the 2060. Look at this example and you can see the difference. The more compact size also means smaller maximum aperture. So I've plotted a graph of the 1840's maximum aperture at different focal length and also compared it with the 2060 lens. If you look at the graph, the maximum aperture of the 1840 is approximately 2/3 stops slower than the 2060 across pretty much the whole focal length range. Now, it's not really a problem if you are shooting during the day or at well-lit indoor area, but if you need to shoot at very dark places, then there will be some noticeable difference in terms of image quality when you are shooting handheld because you have to bump up the ISO quite a bit. It may also affect the low light autofocus performance as well. When there's enough ambient light, autofocus performance when shooting photo is decent. The autofocus speed appears to be slightly slower than the other Lumix S lenses, but the autofocus operation is reasonably quiet and smooth. Video autofocus speed is also pretty fast and also smooth when I test it with the Lumix S9. When I change the target between close and medium distance, the focus changes quickly. Human tracking also works quite well and reliable. So while the autofocus speed is not the fastest, but overall the autofocus performance is pretty decent. We'll look at the image quality now, and let's start with image sharpness test at the wide end, and that is 18mm focal length for the Lumix S 1840, and I will also compare it with the Lumix 2060 at 20mm focal length because that's the widest focal length for the 2060 lens. Because of that, I move my tripod position back by a few steps when shooting with the 2060 lens to get a more similar picture composition. Let's look at the center. At the maximum aperture, which is f4.5 for the 1840 and 3.5 for the 2060, both lenses are already very sharp at the center. Because of that, stopping down doesn't make any noticeable difference to the center sharpness or contrast. The center sharpness remains excellent until f11, then it becomes a bit softer due to diffraction. If we look at the corner now, again, both lenses are at maximum aperture. The 1840 is pretty good in terms of corner sharpness, a little bit better than the 2060, but the 2060 is at f3.5, not 4.5 in this comparison photo. If we stop down both lenses to f5.6, now the sharpness seems very similar. f8 gives the best corner sharpness for both lenses, then if we stop down further, it will be softer again due to diffraction. At 18mm focal length, focus at the corner or center doesn't seem to make any difference to the corner sharpness of the 1840 lens. At the telephoto end, 40mm focal length, the 1840's center sharpness is excellent at wide open. Compared to the 2060, it's pretty much the same. But the 2060's maximum aperture is a little bit faster at f4.7, Stopping down the lens doesn't make any difference to the center sharpness, and the center sharpness remains the same until around f11. By the way, the 1840 can stop down to f32 at 40mm focal length, while the minimum aperture for the 2060 is f22. And we have a look at the corner sharpness at 40mm focal length. When shooting at wide open, corner of the 1840 is okay. Not very sharp, but I think acceptable. This is the same for the 2060 at maximum aperture, which is 4.7. It is also a little bit soft. At f8, I can see some noticeable improvements in corner sharpness for both lenses. With the 1840, we reach the maximum sharpness at f11. Focus at corner seems to improve the corner sharpness of the 1840 a little bit, so there may be a little bit of field curvature with this lens at 40mm focal length. In terms of close-up shooting performance, the minimum focus distance of the 1840 is 0.15 meter when the focal length is between 18 to 21mm. After that, the minimum focus distance is 0.35 meter. The maximum magnification is achieved at 21mm focal length, and it is 0.28 times, which is not bad. The Lumix 2060 has even higher maximum magnification at 0.43 times, which is really good. Having said that, I think most people will be pretty happy with the 1840 lens. With the wide-ish focal length and the slow aperture, this Lumix S 1840 is not a lens that you can dissolve the background very easily. The only time you can do that would be when you are shooting close-up photos. And when you do that, bokeh looks alright. Most of the time it's reasonably smooth. However, I do see a bit of halo ring around the bokeh in some of the photos. With vignetting compensation enabled, the 1840 has very minimal amount of vignetting at both the wide end and tele end. This is quite similar to the Lumix 2060. If I disable vignetting compensation, now vignetting is a lot more visible. This is especially at 18mm with the 1840 lens. I can see light fall off near the corner even when I stop down the lens a bit. While the 2060 I can still see a bit of vignetting, it is not as obvious as the 1840. The 1840 has decent chromatic aberration control. When I look at all my real-world photos I shot with this lens, I see minimal chromatic aberration. Look at all these photos, I don't see any nasty color fringing. This is similar to the Lumix 2060, which also has quite minimal chromatic aberration. Let's look at distortion now. With the lens profile correction enabled, this new Lumix lens has very minimal amount of distortion. Look at these two photos shot at wide end and tele end. There is virtually no distortion. Once again, this is similar to the Lumix 2060. However, if we disable the distortion correction, it is another story. Distortion is now a lot more noticeable, especially at the wide angle end. This 1840 lens has very good lens flare control. Even though the lens doesn't have any lens hood, but no matter when I'm shooting at the wide end or tele end, the amount of lens flare is still very minimal. I just don't really see much lens flare at all. Only when I shoot at the minimum aperture, then I can see some long lens flare with the 1840, which is part of the Sunstars. If I compare it with the Lumix 2060, the amount of lens flare seems very similar. It is not very easy to get nice sharp Sunstars when shooting with this 1840 lens. We need to stop down quite a lot for the Sunstars to start appear in the photo. But even when I stop down the lens to the minimum aperture, the Sunstars still look a little bit messy to me. The tails are quite spread out, which I personally don't like. When I compare it with the Lumix 2060, I like the Sunstars from the 2060 more, as the Sunstars are a bit sharper and also cleaner in my opinion. when I shoot vlogging style video using a Lumix S camera, so far the Lumix S 2060 is my preferred lens choice. One of the reasons is I really like the 20mm wide-end focal length, and also it's because of its compact size and the weight is not very heavy at all. But could this new 1840 lens be my new favorite lens for vlogging? And my answer is yes, and there are two main reasons. The first one is the more compact size, but more importantly, it is a lighter lens. That means holding the camera for an extended period of time is much easier. The second reason is the slightly wider angle. 20mm wide end with the 2060 lens is actually very good. It's wide enough. But this 1840 is a little bit wider, means I can have an even wider field of view and my face will be a bit smaller in the frame if I want to. Look at this comparison footage. You can see the 18mm focal length allow me to capture a slightly wider angle. Or if I don't need to capture such a wide angle, I could hold the camera a little bit closer to my face, which means my hand doesn't have to extend quite as much. My arm won't be tired so easily, especially since the 1840 lens is also a little bit lighter than the 2060 lens. Lumix cameras have really good IBIS, or the in-body image stabilizer, for video. I would say class leading. But one problem Lumix, and to be honest all the camera manufacturers haven't really able to fix with the IBIS, is the corner wobbling when you are shooting with a wide angle lens. So when you are shooting vlogging video with a wide angle lens, quite often you will see the wobbly effect near the corner of the video. With the latest Lumix cameras like the S5 II or the S9, Panasonic has implemented real-time in-camera perspective distortion correction as part of their electronic image stabilization system, which not only make the video looks more steady, but it also help minimize the wobbly corner effect. But electronic image stabilization requires a bit of cropping. So I don't use it a lot when shooting with the Lumix 2060 lens, as the wide end would effectively becomes around 22mm or so focal length with the standard electronic image stabilization turned on. To be honest, it is okay, but I just prefer a slightly wider field of view. With this 1840 lens, since the wide end is a little bit wider, so even with the standard electronic stabilization enabled, the effective focal length is still just around 20mm or so, so that is perfect for me. And with that, the image is even more stable with very little amount of corner wobbling. Look at this comparison video. You can see the video shot with the S9 and the 1840 just looks super stable. However, there is a bit of trade-off when you compare it with the Lumix 2060 for vlogging. First one, since the maximum aperture is only f4.5 at 18mm, you cannot create as much foreground-background separation as the 2060 lens, which has a f3.5 maximum aperture at 20mm. You can still dissolve the background a bit, but if you want to blur the background more, the 2060 lens would be a better choice. And when you are shooting vlogging style video, it's not always about just pointing the camera towards yourself. You would quite often want to point the camera forward and capture things that is in front of you, and sometimes capture things that are far away. But since the maximum focal length is only 40mm with the 1840 lens, it doesn't give you as much zoom as the 2060 lens. However, the Lumix S9 has the hybrid zoom feature, which allows you to get longer focal length, up to 62mm when shooting in 4K mode, or even up to 125mm when shooting full HD video. That does help a bit. However, I can also say if you shoot with the 2060mm lens, you can get even longer effective focal length using the hybrid zoom. So If you want to be able to zoom in more, the 2060 is still a better choice. So over the last week, I have been traveling in Taiwan and right now I'm in Japan. So I got the Lumix S 1840 with me and have been shooting lots of photos and video using this lens and also with the Lumix S9. That's the camera combo that I bought with me. So overall, I definitely very enjoy shooting with this combo with the Lumix 1840 with the S9. It is very compact, very lightweight. So I can chuck it into my backpack very easily, just put it one side, and if I carry it around, just hang it around my neck, even when I'm walking a long day, it still doesn't feel very heavy at all, even after many hours of walking around. Now, while I said compact, it is only when the lens is in the collapse form. If I extend the lens, then the lens is not actually that compact anymore. It's roughly the size of the Lumix S 2060, which is not bad, but it is not as small as when I fully collapse the lens. So what it means is, usually after I finish taking photos, I would collapse the lens so that it is more compact when I am walking around traveling, and before I take more photos, I will have to turn on the camera and then rotate the lens to extend it. So that is one more step that I have to do compared with a normal lens. It is not a lot of work to do, but it is one extra step compared to other normal lenses. So I'm thinking maybe one thing that Panasonic can do is maybe if you collapse the lens, then the camera would automatically turn into sleep mode, and then when I extend the lens, then it will automatically wake up the camera. So that means I don't even have to use the power switch on the camera. I think with changes like this, maybe it will make the camera even faster, easier to use. But I understand maybe not everyone will love this idea. Maybe Panasonic can make it one of the setup options. But then there is another option add to the setup screen. There are already lots of options there. Not sure if it's a good idea or not. But anyway, that's just a thought I had when I was shooting with this combo in Taiwan and Japan this week. Now, if I compare this new Lumix S 1840 with the Lumix S 2060, which is a lens that I really love, and I've also used it a lot, including some of my recent trips to Japan, I think one thing I love about the 1840 is I love the slightly wider field of view. Because some of you would know that I love shooting in that 65-24 ultra wide aspect ratio. But with that setting, what it means is the camera would crop quite a bit vertically, so your vertical field of view is now a lot narrower compared to if you shoot in the normal 3:2 aspect ratio, which means when I previously shoot with the 2060, while horizontally, the field of view is quite wide, but vertically, it is not really that wide. So with this 1840 lens, I now can get a little bit more vertical field of view, which I find is really useful when I'm shooting in tight indoor space or in city that I want to cover a very wide angle. But on the other hand, the 10 40mm is definitely quite a bit not as far as the 2060. I can feel the difference compared to the 2060 lens quite noticeably when I'm shooting with this 1840 lens. In terms of image quality, I'm very happy with the photos that I shot with this lens. It's very good sharpness, more than good enough, and I don't see too many image artifacts at all. If I compare it with the Lumix S 2060 or the 28-200, I think they're all quite similar. Maybe if I do some side-by-side comparison, I may see some difference, but when you're shooting in real world, I think they give you virtually same image quality. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning, this trip I brought with me the S9 and the 1840 lens, and I also brought with me the Sigma 45mm f2.8 lens. So, which lens I end up shooting more? Well, I just had a look at all the photos that I shot during this trip, and I would say
most of the photos, majority of the photos were shot with the 1840 lens. I only used the Sigma lens maybe 3 or 4 times during this whole trip so far and shot maybe 20 photos or so, while with the Lumix 1840 lens, I have shot a few hundred photos so far. So I definitely end up using the 1840 lens a lot more than the Sigma lens. I think one of the biggest reasons is just a zoom lens is just a lot easier when you are walking around, traveling around, especially with family, with kids. It's just not very convenient to swap lens all the time, and a lot of time I just take photos when I see the chance, so I don't have much time to slow down, change the lens and find the best composition. I just stand there, snap, that's it. So because of that, the 1840 lens is just a lot more convenient compared to the Sigma lens. Sigma lens definitely has a lot of advantage, like give you more shallow depth of field and better low light performance. However, I found that when I shoot with the S9, because its sensors low light performance is already pretty good, and also with the IBIS I can shoot with much slower shutter speed. So combine it together, I don't find I have too much issue even when shooting with this 1840 lens that doesn't have very fast aperture, but I definitely cannot get the shallow depth of field photos using this combo. So anyway, this is my review of this new 1840 lens. Sorry, there's a lot of train running past, so hopefully there's not too much train noise in the background. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what you guys think about this new 1840 lens, and do you want to see more compact lens like this from Panasonic for your Lumix S9 or other L mount camera? Drop a comment below, let me know, and let's have a chat in the comment section below.